For Godzilla's next challenge, Toho would bring on board a director who had helmed a number of movies in one of their biggest rival franchises, the Gamera franchise. Shusuke Kaneko had found great success directing the Gamera franchise throughout the 90s, and would bring a fresh lens through which to view not only Godzilla the character, but the spirit of the franchise as a whole, in his 2001 film, Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack.
Let them fight.
You're a wizard, Harry.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. I'll be back.
Death has come to your little township.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chills and Thrills. My name is Connor Dunham and I am here with Chris, and we are doing a title that is definitely a mouthful in the Godzilla franchise with Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, or in short for the Godzilla fandom is GMK. And this is a great film. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, one of the notorious examples of, I think it's a basically word for word direct translation from the Japanese titles. A lot of the Japanese titles have these wild sort of outlandish names. I think that's just how they do it in Japan. And like, this is the one case where it's like a 100% verbatim translation into English.
Yeah, like you said, that doesn't happen too often, but this is a title that I'm glad we found something to shorten it up in GMK, and I'm very high on this film. I'll go into a little bit of background on it, and then we can talk about how we were introduced with it, or what we give a little rundown of what we think of the film.
Agreed, and it's a little bit of a shame because it has it's a highlight entry in the franchise, and it has this kind of very goofy title. You know, if you were to just hear this title, you might think, if you were a bit more of a normie, you might think, well, that's got to be one of the silly ones, you know, like that's got to be one of the goofy ones. And this is like one of the top tier of the Millennium era by far.
Absolutely, I 100% agree with you on that. And I'll get into it by starting with this film, Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, or GMK, is a 2001 Japanese kaiju film directed and co-written by Shusuke Kaneko, with special effects by Makoto Kamiya, distributed by Toho, and produced under their subsidiary Toho Pictures. It is the 26th film in the Godzilla franchise and the third film in the Millennium era. The film stars Shiharu Niyama, Ryuru Uzaki, Masahiro Kobayashi, Hideo Amamoto, and Shiri Sano, with Mizuho Yoshida as Godzilla, Akiri Ohashi as King Ghidorah, Ri Oda as Baragon. In this film, Mothra, King Ghidorah, and Baragon defend Japan from Godzilla, who has been possessed by the souls of those that were killed during the Pacific War. Like the other films in the franchise's Millennium period, GMK serves as a direct sequel to the original 1954 Godzilla film, and ignoring the events of every other installment in the series, minus a small reference to the Zilla monster from Godzilla 1998. So, Chris, how do you feel about this film, or what are your memories from your first couple times watching this film, or even most recently? What do you think about it?
Yeah, first and foremost, I love the movie. It's one of those that there was a bit of after Godzilla 2000, you know, Godzilla versus Megaguirus and GMK both hit theaters in Japan, and then it was a while before any of them. Actually, I think it was 3 in a row. Megaguirus, GMK, and Godzilla against Mechagodzilla all hit theaters in Japan before we ever got them over here in the U.S. It wasn't like these days where stuff kind of gets imported very fast. You know, you had to wait for a distributor to pick it up, and you didn't really just have like a readily available option on the internet. Just go find any new Japanese release. And according to Wikipedia, these debuted on the Sci-Fi Channel on August 31st, 2003. I wouldn't have remembered that date, but I do remember when Megaguirus and GMK debuted back-to-back on the Sci-Fi Channel. That is how I first watched them, and I think I had a DVD recorder at the time, and I recorded them on DVD so that I could like have them in because there was no idea when they were going to come out on VHS or DVD, back then, and so I recorded them on DVD to have them. But that's the first time I watched them back to back, and I have loved GMK ever since. I think it's aged like a fine wine. I think in a lot of ways you can make the case that it's easily number one and number two of the Millennium era for me. I mean, it certainly would have to be top three. It's just any given Sunday how you feel about it. It's more of a fantasy movie, which isn't usually my general preference for Godzilla movies, but it's just executed so well. The special effects and the monster action and everything about it is just handled so well that I pretty much love it start to finish. And this most recent rewatch was no different.
Yeah, I feel like every time I rewatch this, it goes higher on my list, or I enjoy it more, or there's something I see that I catch on to. Like it has a very good story and plot line to the film. And as soon as, Godzilla enters in the film, it almost, from there on out, the film just goes hard as a film and a movie. There's a fight scene. And then in a couple minutes, there's a lot of Godzilla in the city in this film, or even like certain camera angles where I like about this film where the ships are in the bay and you have like a low angle to make like Godzilla look a little like more beefy and just like a bigger threat to like it makes the city landscape look a little smaller than what it actually is from just a little tweak of a camera angle or something. And I always pay attention to that in films, like the camera angle or the camera speed or things like that. I like noticing, and there's a couple of that in this film. And I second what you said. This is definitely at minimum a top three of the Millennium era or series of films. And it's just it's a fun ride all the way through.
Yeah, and you can certainly tell that, with Godzilla versus Megaguirus, that was the director making his debut, and it's sort of got, in terms of visual style and execution, it's sort of plain in how it's handled. There's not a lot of flair. This is a guy who directed the famous and exceptional Gamera trilogy in the 90s. And so he's got not only 3 giant monster movies under his belt, but 3 of the best giant monster movies under his belt of the time. And you can tell this is being handled by someone with a bit more experience, a bit more eye. There's style to it. There's sort of intent with the editing and the direction and the character. Like this, I hate to say like, oh, that's a movie and this is a film, but there's a cinematic quality to this that really kind of wasn't there with Megaguirus. That there's a lot to appreciate about how this one's executed.
Yeah, it just seems like this one, it keeps you not only more entertained, but the characters and like the storyline, they pull you in to where you have to pay attention to this film, but you enjoy it while you're paying attention. As to Megaguirus, it kind of at least for me, it kind of drags along with the black hole plot and whatnot. And I still enjoy it, but compared to this film, I mean, this film is leaps and bounds above Megaguirus.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing big that I notice is that a lot of Godzilla movies, and maybe it's Japanese movies as a whole, I can't say that I've seen a huge amount of non-Godzilla Japanese movies, but we talked about how the Japanese version of Godzilla 2000 didn't have a lot of music, and one of the things that the American version improved a lot was adding a lot of music where it was needed. One thing I noticed about this film is that there's a lot of music throughout it. It feels very driven by the use of music, and the musical score is exceptional, and like it just gives an energy to a lot of scenes that in other Godzilla films might have been played with no music and might have come across a little less energetic.
Yeah, and this one, when I looked up the soundtrack, I believe there are 51 individual soundtracks to this film. Granted, some of them are repeated or like a shorter segment of like the main title and whatnot. But I mean, I believe the soundtrack is roughly just a little over an hour long. And I mean, the film's an hour and 40 some odd minutes. So, I mean, there's definitely, like you said, a lot of music in this film. And we'll get into it, but I absolutely enjoy the soundtrack and the score to this film.
Yeah, it's there are a lot of accolades that this film deserves, and I'm sure as we break down into each category, we'll heap the praises over and over.
Absolutely. But how about we get into a trailer for GMK, come back with a plot synopsis on the film, and then we'll get into, maybe we'll jump right into our favorite character right away and save some numbers and fun facts for a little later.
That works for me.
千年竜王
東国聖樹伝記によると日本には古来バラゴン、モスラ、ギドラなどの怪獣がいてゴジラ発見三大怪獣ついに激突
キングギドラ
生き残るのは誰だゴジラ、モスラ、キングギドラ大怪獣総攻撃
During a briefing with the JSDF regarding Godzilla's first attack, Admiral Taizo Tachibana is alerted about an American nuclear submarine that went missing off Guam. Search and rescue units find the sub destroyed and capture footage of a giant creature's fins nearby. Tachibana's daughter, Yuri, films a docudrama with her production crew at Mount Miyoko, where a mysterious earthquake briefly occurs. It occurs again later that night, burying a biker gang and leaving one surviving trucker, who witnesses the monster Baragon, which he misidentifies as Godzilla. The next day, Yuri's colleague Toriki Takada supports her theory that a monster may have been the cause of the mysterious earthquakes and gives her a book called The Guardian Monsters. At Lake Ikeda, a Mothra larva attacks a group of teenagers who disturbed her shrine while in Okigahara. A suicidal man accidentally encounters a frozen Ghidorah. Yuri interviews Hirotoshi Isayama, an elderly man who explains to her the legend of the Guardian Monsters, Baragon, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, iterating that they must be awakened before Godzilla destroys Japan. Yuri and her team visit the Guardian Monsters shrine, where she finds a strange stone before returning to interview Isayama. In the process, she discovers that the souls of those who were killed during the Pacific War are embedded within Godzilla and are lashing out due to modern Japan's denial of its past crimes. Godzilla and Baragon surface and battle in Hakone, with the former emerging victorious. Yuri is injured during the fray and goes on her own after Takada refuses to take her to Godzilla's location. Mothra's cocoon is discovered in Lake Ikeda. After the jets fail to stop Godzilla, Tachibana sets up a defense line in Yokohama. An imago Mothra and a juvenile Ghidorah awaken and battle Godzilla in Yokohama. Mothra sacrifices herself and imbues her spirit in Ghidorah, transforming him into the 3,000-year-old dragon King Ghidorah, who manages to injure and drag Godzilla underwater. Tachibana and his colleague board miniature submarines to launch missiles into Godzilla's wound. Yuri and Takada report on the struggle from a bridge that later collapses from Godzilla's atomic breath. The shrine stone falls from Takada's pocket and revives King Ghidorah, who saves Yuri and Takada from their fall before they swim ashore while the monsters continue to fight. Godzilla destroys King Ghidorah, unleashing the spirits of the Guardian Monsters, which drag Godzilla into the sea. After entering Godzilla's body through his mouth, Tachibana fires a missile at the wound. Godzilla attempts to kill Yuri and Takada, but Tachibana's missile explodes, causing his atomic breath to escape through the gaping wound and build pressure within his body. Tachibana escapes as Godzilla sinks and explodes after attempting to kill Tachibana with his atomic breath. Japan rejoices at their victory, with Tachibana saluting his colleagues and the Guardian Monsters. On the ocean floor, Godzilla's disembodied heart continues to beat.
Alrighty, so My favorite character in this film was, unsurprisingly, Admiral Tachibana, the sort of, grizzled military veteran of the film, who's got a little bit of a something of a Ahab and Moby Dick kind of vibe with Godzilla. Not so much. It's not like he's like pursuing Godzilla and hunting Godzilla, but by the end of it, when the climax gets down to it, and it's him and his lone sub kind of facing down Godzilla on his own, it just feels it's a cool dynamic to have, a character sort of one human alone, sort of opposed to Godzilla, and I just a lot of these films are often about younger folks or scientists or young heroine characters. This film has a young female at the center, but he brings this sort of elder statesman, veteran energy to it. This sort of wise, sort of determined male hero kind of role, and I really liked that in this movie.
Yeah, and he was also my favorite character. Again, I always try to find somebody I can relate to, and he's trying to look out for his daughter, protect his daughter, and he's always like, keep her out of here, get her away from here, and then he gives her, in the end, he does give her clearance to be like around the military and whatnot. And he has very good scenes where I like at the end, he's saluting his troops, and the guardian monsters and everyone who died and was killed from this Godzilla, and he's a very serious character, and you don't get a lot of very serious characters in these Godzilla films. You get the goofy guy, or you get the colonel who's coming after, or the army military character whose friend was killed, so they're on a rampage to revenge after Godzilla and whatnot. But he was just an easy character to like. He's literally just doing his job.
Yeah, he's cool. Yuri's a great character. I think the two of them together are great sort of co-leads of the movie, sort of leading the two sides. I think that kind of dynamic, a sort of reporter, inquisitive, curious sort of younger character, and then a sort of someone on the sort of science or military side of it. Because then through those characters, you always have ways of seeing how the military is dealing with the monsters, react to the monsters, then seeing how sort of ordinary people are learning about or discovering more about the monster. You kind of do need certain roles in a monster movie or a Godzilla movie to kind of fulfill certain plot needs. And so when the character archetypes kind of slide into certain roles, it makes a lot of scenes a lot easier to happen. You don't have to have, a dozen different supporting characters all fulfilling this different role or that different role, So I think it's a good dynamic for these two characters.
Absolutely, and very well said. I absolutely agree with you on that one. We will get into favorite score, and I feel like we might be in cahoots on this one. There is a lot to this film for the score and soundtrack. But the main title for GMK, and I will shout out a couple other ones a little later, but the main title is phenomenal in this film, and that is just take a listen and enjoy. Just another great Godzilla soundtrack that you can put on and just jam to.
Yeah, it's exceptional. I kind of picked out three that I could have gone with in case you also went with main title. Main title was one of them. The two sort of standouts for me outside of that, there's a track called Godzilla's Rage, and then there's a track called God of the Sky or God of the Sky King Ghidorah. Depending on where I found it, it was either one or the other. But they're just, the main themes for Godzilla, the main themes for Ghidorah. There's just, and Mothra as well. They all have these sort of musical identities in this movie, and most of the tracks are various interminglings of their themes. And for a film that sort of, these are monsters that often have kind of signified themes in some of the classic movies. Everyone knows Godzilla's classic theme. So for a new film to kind of give them each new musical identities and to kind of hit it out of the park so well, I think it was fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give a little of the God of the Sky, what is on the soundtrack noted as King Ghidorah's theme. That's another fantastic title from this film. And the only other one I thought of, Chris, sorry, is
Good.
It's almost like the military march. That's something I can easily, kind of bop my head to and just listen to.
It's like you could go down the list. Like this is one that it's there. There's sort of an all killer, no filler kind of vibe to this musical score, and it feels very much, these tracks have the kind of energy that you would maybe hear in like a really, really good Japanese anime or something like that. There's just a lot of, you could just hear these, in that type of setting. There's just a lot of energy to them. They're really catchy. It's really great work. And dare I say, maybe the standout score of the Millennium Era. Maybe we can debate about whether this is the top film, but I think I'd very much pick this as the highlight for the musical scores of the Millennium Era.
Yeah, I mean, besides a little portion at the end where the Godzilla theme or the Godzilla march is brought back in, I mean, I believe it's an entirely new soundtrack. So I'd have to agree with you on that one.
Yeah, and normally I would be the first person to kind of complain of saying like, well, I think at every point, every Godzilla movie should try to have the main theme in there in some kind of meaningful way, and saving it for the end. I don't know. I really like that choice. The new stuff is so great, and it's interesting because you kind of imagine a world where like this feels sort of more like it could have been the start of a new. We talk about how Godzilla 2000 would have been cool to get sequels and for that to have been a continued continuity like the Heisei era, but this is another one where it felt like a really good opportunity because it's this whole kind of new mythos around Godzilla that's got this more fantasy element to it. He's more of a demon, and you hold back on the main theme until the very end, almost like like this has been the reintroduction of Godzilla, and sequels to this movie could maybe be a bit more on the traditional side, and maybe have the main theme more incorporated. Who knows of any varieties, but I would almost be willing to sacrifice Godzilla 2000 if this is the movie we could have gotten 2 years sooner to launch a series.
Ooh, I don't know if I agree with you, but
I said almost.
All right. I'll let that one slide. But this is definitely a top tier film, along in my mind with Godzilla 2000. But that's something we can talk about when we get into our Millennium Era ranking at the end.
Agreed.
Do you wanna? Did you have a favorite quote or favorite line of dialogue from this film?
I'll defer to you first, sir.
All right. Well, mine, I honestly can't find who said it. It was just like a little line that made me chuckle. I love when films do this. One of the generals, he says, "Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah. This really is a giant monster all-out attack," and it's just like, there it is. He said it.
Is that in the subtitled version?
I believe so. From what I found, I went to go back. But it's
okay, yeah, because I watched the dub and it doesn't. That's funny. They're like, that line's not in the dub, at least as far as I can remember. I feel like I would have noticed that. That's interesting. If there's one of the lines that's like an accurate subtitle of that in the movie, that's great.
Yeah, it's that gave me a good chuckle because I love it. Every time a film does that, I think of the Leonardo DiCaprio meme where he's sitting in the rocket and he's
there
like,
it is.
TV. Yep, there it is.
Yep, there it is. Yeah, it's always fun, especially when it's and again, Japanese terms and phrases sort of translate a little not so smoothly to English. Like Spanish translates to English, a lot smoother. There's a bit more difference in the language with Japanese. So like, but that is probably the closest to the phrasing, because like their word for giant monster would be like kaiju, so it's probably like kaiju whatever. So it's like, that's hilarious that's a line in the movie.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and see where it says it at, and then I'll have to shoot you a message and be like,
yeah,
32 minutes and 17 seconds in, it's right there.
That's great. That's great. One of the lines of dialogue that I liked a lot is there's a scene where Yuri is talking about, there's this whole concept in the movie, like these stones that can sort of store sort of information and energies and things of that. There's this fantasy element of the movie, which, it's not so amazing, but for the purposes of the movie, it's kind of cool. And she says something to the effect, the dub, I'm sure, is probably translated a little differently than the subtitle, but it's something to the effect of like, if the earth and stones could only talk, imagine the stories they would tell us. And I love that line in particular because it is called back to in Godzilla King of the Monsters. There's a scene where they're approaching Godzilla's underwater lair-ish, and one of the scientists mentions that line, and it's so cool because it's like a direct, this film mentions that it's like a Native American proverb, but I'm almost 100% confident that line in King of the Monsters is done sort of as a direct reference to this movie, which is just very, very cool to me because it's such an obscure connection, but I always love it when you can find these little pieces to tie different Godzilla movies together.
Yeah, for sure. There's always a callback, and when we get to that film, the 2019 King of the Monsters, there is so many callbacks to the franchise we're gonna have plenty to talk about.
Yeah, it's almost completely. You could do an hour-long podcast just about all of the winks, nods, connections, parallels, mirrors of it, and all of the. It's truly a love letter to the series.
Yeah, and I will. When that film first came out, I remember it getting a lot of flack, and not almost being called like a box office bomb, and I was 100% backing it. Like this film is
It's peak.
phenomenal. Like
It's peak. Yeah, the people that hate on I think the detractors of the MonsterVerse in general. I'm like, I don't know what you're smoking. I'm like, these things they're exceptional.
yeah, what did you expect? This is it's a 30 some odd film in the franchise, and it's all CGI and whatnot. It just once we get there, you'll see where I rank that film and whatnot, and it's just that was one of the ones that I could almost watch every day.
MonsterVerse is peak. Sorry, spoiler alert, but it's peak.
100% agree. Don't add us. No.
No, hey, do it. I'll defend it to the day I die. All right, GMK. Where are we going next? Scenes? We want to go into monster design. How we want to do this?
What is your favorite scene, my good sir?
It would have to be a sort of, it's easily Mothra's death and Ghidorah's revival. That I was watching on a standard def, who knows how many inch TV in my grandmother's house in August of 2003 when I saw that. But for 11-year-old me, I might as well have been in the front row of an IMAX theater when that sequence was happening, because it's just it's pure cinema. Godzilla's about to roast some military guys. Mothra comes up behind him, and right when you think Mothra's going to get her big hero moment, and Godzilla does a completely 180 and unleashes his breath point blank on Mothra, completely vaporizes her, and then her energy goes over into the unconscious or potentially dead at that point King Ghidorah. Ghidorah's wings finally burst out. He's in silhouette with this energy flowing out of him, and he flies into the sky. It is just like, it's epic stuff, It's anime stuff, if you will, and it's easily hands down my favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, King Ghidorah got the Godzilla treatment in this film, where it gets the power up, and
exactly,
it's a good guy in this one.
Yeah, and again, almost inverted again in King of the Monsters, where it's sort of mirrored. The roles are all reversed.
Yeah, for sure.
Except for Mothra's, of course, but
Well, right. We couldn't, again, once we get to that film, Mothra and Godzilla fighting side by side is another thing that made me cheer in the theaters. Like, hell yeah. Like
it's perfect. But yes, what was your favorite scene, sir?
I absolutely loved the scene that you just spoke of, but I chose the initial fight Godzilla has with Baragon. There's just some good lines in it, like our guardian monster doesn't have a chance, and they just
yeah. It's fun when the movies can kind of do slightly meta humor in a way that kind of works, like the sort of, in the dub it's fun because in the dub almost every line of dialogue is delivered in this sort of off-kilter way. It's either too animated or too dry, and I can think of the line right now where he's just like, our guardian monster doesn't have a chance. It's like, yeah, you're damn right he doesn't.
Yeah, he's biting Godzilla's arm, and Godzilla just picks his arms up and like body slams him with one arm. He goes to jump at him, and he like looks at him for a second, turns around and smacks him with his tail into the helicopter. And the first couple times he unleashes his atomic breath, where it's just like an explosion coming out of his mouth, and you see the power that this Godzilla has. It's like, oh, Toho wasn't screwing around on this one. Like, he's pissed, and he's coming back with a vengeance with these souls of the dead.
Yeah, I love that Baragon gets brought back after sort of, his major role and debut was in, Frankenstein Conquers the World, where he was almost a stand-in for a Godzilla type of creature in that movie. He had like a fire breath that was like almost like a red version of Godzilla's breath in that movie. Like, he's essentially serving that role. And then he's like barely in Destroy All Monsters, and then he gets his sort of heroic return in this movie just to kind of be immediately curb stomped by Godzilla and killed.
Yeah, I like Baragon. I almost, after seeing him in this film, I was like, why hasn't this monster been in another film or two? With a tag team with Anguirus or something, or that, just two kind of monsters that are on all fours, and
Yeah,
I
interesting.
I like those kind of monsters.
Indeed. Did you? I'm sure you're aware of the version of this movie that was originally pitched, right?
I, I am, and I have some of it in fun facts,
Okay.
but you
So
you go
so yeah,
ahead.
no, we'll save it when we get onto it. We'll talk about it because it's this whole other fantastic discussion to have. So we'll pocket that for when we bring that up.
All right, we can do that. Well, do you want to go into fun facts right now, since we're pretty much talking about it anyway?
Yeah, unleash them.
All right, my first one for you is prior to arriving at the idea to pit Godzilla against three guardian monsters, director Shisuke Kaneko considered other stories featuring Kamacuras, or a mutated astronaut called M as one of Godzilla's foes, or as Godzilla's foe in this film. And then for this film, Godzilla was originally slated to face off against a revamped version of Kamacuras, but Kaneko ultimately decided to place Godzilla against three monsters representing elements of the Earth: Varan, Baragon, and Anguirus, and then Toho later convinced him to replace Varan and Anguirus with King Ghidorah and Mothra in order to make the film a box office success.
And
So
that's interesting. About the first concept, just Godzilla versus Kamacuras, that one sounds so kind of unique and odd in that it's like you have to imagine that Shisuke Kaneko grew up as like a very particular fan of Kamacuras and just like had a like, because that would have been a one-on-one type of movie. Like this would have been a totally different concept, and then clearly he probably got something a bit more ambitious, and it really would have been cool to see sort of Varan, Anguirus, Baragon, sort of three of a type. Like if we were talking Pokemon here, they'd be in the same sort of Pokemon family, if you will. And that would have been a good dynamic because then Godzilla would have been huge and sort of fighting these sort of quadruped creatures, and it would have been this really interesting dynamic. Excuse me. And from what I understand, that version of the script would have also had like a legion of maser tanks. It would have had the Gotengo ship with the drill on the end. You know, it would have been this much more sort of sci-fi story, and those things would have been awesome to see. You know, I can understand Toho wanting to put in big headliners like Ghidorah and Mothra in, but I think we potentially would have gotten a better film if we'd gotten all that other stuff, and it would have been nice to still keep all the other advanced tech. And it's interesting that Baragon was chosen as the one to stay when you think the obvious one would have been Anguirus, but it's an interesting evolution into the film we have.
Yeah, I like reading about how films change over the many months and the process that it takes to actually get the film into like principal photography and filming and whatnot. And it's just I'm a film nerd, so I like learning like how all the special features and whatnot are made as well. So all this kind of stuff interests me.
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution for sure.
This film, principal photography for GMK began on May 11th, 2001, and wrapped on August 9th of 2001. So this was it was about a little over 3 months for this film to be filmed and processed, which is, I mean, it's not a very long time for as good of a film as we have here.
And originally it was slated for a March of 2002 release, and depending on your sources, either the director or Toho pushed it into that more traditional December release, but that caused some aspects of it to be kind of rushed. And again, depending on where you're reading, some claim that because it was sort of finished in time for December, that the initial version of the movie was sort of rough around the edges, and that they later sort of tweaked it and refined it. And that's the version that like we all have, I suppose. But again, it's kind of, there's a little bit of gray in there, but it was definitely supposed to come out in March of 2002, and then it was moved to December of 2001. And you like to think that, you know, if it had gotten that extra post-production time, how much more sort of polished everything might have been, and the movie as a whole may have been, you know, even stronger than it is.
Yeah, I can't imagine how much stronger of a film we would have got, but if it could have turned out stronger, I would have loved to have seen what they would have come up with.
Yeah, because what we ended up getting was still pretty darn impressive and holds up quite well for a 22-year-old film at this point.
Yeah, I'll give you a spoiler. Once we get to the ratings and whatnot, the scores for this film, I'm sure you might have seen them on looking some stuff up, but they are disappointing.
Oh, I never look up the scores or anything. I leave the research side of it to you so that I can kind of be caught and caught on the fly with certain things.
Okay, okay. Well, we'll get back to some fun facts, and then I'll disappoint you here in a little bit. The film received mostly international critical acclaim and was the third highest grossing Japanese film of 2002. And now GMK is now considered among the best Godzilla films in the franchise, which we have said here multiple times. So clearly, a lot of other Godzilla fans agree with us on this one.
No arguments there.
A reference to Godzilla or Zilla 1998 featured in the film was converted and added by Kaneko in an early draft of the script as a joke due to that film's unpopularity.
Yeah, and some people, it's interesting, I wish that some people in the movie-going world would sort of be able to appreciate the difference between a sort of a nod or a wink or a reference and something that is meant to be a sort of like a confirmation of continuity. People are like, oh, you got to watch G54, then G98, and then GMK. It's like, no. It's like when you watch Godzilla 98, it's very clear that the events of Godzilla 54 never happened. This is the first time a creature's ever appeared in the world. And so clearly, like, 54 and G98 don't work together, and you're not meant to view them as like a trilogy with GMK. Like, it's literally just meant to be a joke and a reference and a nod. It's not literally confirmation. Like, there's a James Bond movie where one of the actors, I think, jokes about like, this never happened to the other fella. It's like these aren't meant to like confirm anything. Like, this is like almost fourth wall breaking. It's like, yes, a 98 attack might have happened in New York in this movie by a non-Godzilla creature, but like, it is not meant to overtly sort of bring Godzilla 98 into the canon. It's just a nod, just a reference.
Yeah, it's like, when a lot of the times in horror movies, or if they like B movies, they're self-aware. So they crack like little jokes at themselves.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a scene in Jurassic Park where Jeff Goldblum's looking at the gates and he says, "What do you got in there, King Kong?" Does that mean King Kong was a real thing in this universe? Like, come on now. Like understand the difference between some stuff that's just like breaking the fourth wall for fans and some stuff that's like real. Like the Incredible Hulk makes jokes about like him having purple stretchy trunks in the movie. It's like, that doesn't mean he's aware of like the existence of Hulk comics where the purple stretchy trunks were a thing. Like, it's just kind of something fun for the audience.
Yep, little winks and nods. Just how we were talking about the 2019 King of the Monsters. There's little winks and nods everywhere.
Exactly. But it is a fun one, particularly in how they frame it. When he's like, "That attack was Godzilla, right?" And he goes, "That's what the American experts say, but our guys here have their doubts." Like, it's like, yeah, Hollywood says it's Godzilla, but like, we all know that shit wasn't Godzilla. Everyone, that's fun.
Yeah, something that gives you a little chuckle.
I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine how the opening night crowds in Japan reacted to that line.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it got a mouthful of laughter. During the scene where King Ghidorah is revived by Mothra's energy, a sign with the Warner Bros. Logo can be seen on top of one of the buildings. Thought that was a cool little call out.
Yeah, a fun thing, because as fate would have it, Warner Brothers ended up being the distributor of the MonsterVerse films. So yeah, it's a fun little connection, and I believe at one point or another, the infamous American version of Godzilla Raids Again, Gigantus the Fire Monster, I believe that was at least originally a Warner Brothers distributed film. So, again, purely coincidental, but stuff like that is fun. I like stuff like that.
Absolutely. Last one I got for you is the King Ghidorah design used in the film Rebirth of Mothra 3 appears in the shot where the Satsuma uses its thermal imagery on King Ghidorah.
Huh, that's interesting. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I never caught that, so I had to go back and look.
Is it when they're looking at Godzilla's wound? Is that it? Like when they use the infrared to like look at Godzilla's wound? Is that the moment?
If I remember right, yes. I watched it a couple days ago, and I believe that was.
Because in that moment, I'm always just looking at Godzilla and the wound. Like I've never given much attention to Ghidorah in that shot. So to like notice that like, oh, this is a different design, but that's really interesting. If it's that's a fun piece of trivia.
Yeah, because comparing that design to this design side by side, they're clearly different.
Yeah, that's fun.
And that's all I got for you for fun facts.
Very nice. Well, those were a lot of fun.
Hey, I try to keep you on your toes here on Chills and Thrills.
Yeah. I wanted to try something fun. If you were to come up with a let's say that you're one of the distribution people at Sony that's picked this up and you're going to put this out on DVD in North America, and you've maybe been charged with the option of coming up with a punchy alternate American title that's not long and drawn out. What would be an alternate title that you would perhaps give this movie?
Oh my goodness. Kind of got me on the spot here. Let's think.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't have any one answer that I love most. I'm just interested in having the discussion. Like, for example, like you could have reduced the title to just be Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, and you could have left it at that because there's no other movie with that title. You could have done what Tokyo SOS did, which is take the other monsters out of the title, and it's just called Godzilla Tokyo SOS, when the Japanese title is Godzilla, Mothra, Mechagodzilla Tokyo SOS. So it's like, so maybe it could have just been called Godzilla Giant Monsters All Out Attack, which is still kind of wordy, or Godzilla All Out Attack, something like that. But I was thinking, like, if it was like a Hollywood room, because Hollywood titles kind of go for like short and ominous and simple. It's like I could see a Hollywood executive calling this something like Godzilla Reborn. Like I know there was almost an American movie made called Godzilla Reborn, but it's like as a title for this movie, when it's sort of like a Godzilla coming back after 50 years, like sort of being like reborn as a demon, like I could see this movie being called Godzilla Reborn and it being a sort of appropriate title.
Yeah, I try to think of like how they say Godzilla was enraged by the souls of the dead. So like maybe like Godzilla Revenge of the Damned or something.
Yeah, sort of lean into something kind of B movie there,
Yeah, kind of like mystical type. I don't know. That's a good conversation to have. Try to think of a different title for this.
Well, yeah, because I mean, everyone always jokes about like the long, wordy, wacky title, and it's like, well, what are some of the other things they could have gone with? I don't know. That's just the sort of stuff I think about.
I'll give me a week, and the next time we record, I'll come back at you with a couple.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like repurposing Godzilla Reborn. That's kind of fun. Like, that's fun to me. You could have gone with like Godzilla Returns, but there's a movie called The Return of Godzilla. So like Godzilla Returns is a little too similar. You could go with Godzilla's Revenge, but again, Godzilla's already got an American version called Godzilla's Revenge. They don't call it that anymore. Now they just call it All Monsters Attack. But it's like there are some limitations to what you could go with. But Godzilla Reborn could be cool.
Yeah, Godzilla, the Guardian Monsters.
Yeah, hey, there you go. Godzilla versus the Guardian Monsters, like that could be kind of fun, like that has some punch to it.
That's the one I'm going to go with. Godzilla and then like colon or whatever, the Guardian Monsters.
Yeah. Godzilla raids again. Oh wait, that's been taken too.
Godzilla the fire monster. Oh shit. No.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a good conversation starter. I like that.
Yeah, there's not a ton of movies where I vouch for like an alternate title, but this is one of them.
Yeah, when the title takes you longer to say than what the movie is. No.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how about I get you into some numbers? Because this film has some good numbers that we like to hear when it comes to Godzilla and it making a profit.
Throw them out there.
This film was produced with a budget of $9.4 million. In its opening weekend, it grossed approximately 1,900,000. That's yen. By the end of its box office run, GMK grossed a total of approximately $20 million with about 2,400,000 tickets sold. It was one of the largest grossing Godzilla films of the Millennium series in Japan. And according to IGN, the film rescued the series since the two previous Millennium films were box office bombs.
Yeah, and that's again, I can understand why the Japanese version of Godzilla 2000 didn't do particularly well in Japan. But and I can understand Godzilla versus Megaguirus not doing that well, but like yeah, clearly like the quality shined through because this one does deserve to have done better than the two of those. And you know, and like I said, it's fun to do the what if scenario. It's like, well, what if this had been the first one they had started with? You know, what if they had just not done Godzilla 2000, not done Megaguirus, and just waited a little bit? And if this was like their first attempts to do a new iteration of the character, it's like, how much more of a stronger foot would what would be known as the Millennium Era have come off with and started with if like they launched it with this bad boy, you know?
Yeah, because this, I mean, we clearly, whoever's listening, they've heard us talk about the Japanese version of Godzilla 2000 and how we both kind of think that's a disappointment compared to the American cut. But I mean, this film, GMK, yeah, if you start with this one and you start with a bang at the box office, and then, you know, because usually if you start with a hit and you want to make another one, the studio is going to shell out, oh, the last one's budget was $9 million. Well, this time we're going to give you $15 million. You know, show us what you can do.
Yeah, exactly. And like, you know, you think about like how well they sort of dubbed and Americanized Godzilla 2000. It's like, what if this was the movie that had gotten that treatment, kind of gotten that polish, that sort of tightened up the editing, the nice dub, you know, like, what if this film had been treated that way, you know, by Sony? It's like that. It's like it only like it maybe could have made the movie even better, you know, like it's just fun to think about.
Always fun to theorize about the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some disappointing numbers for you. Rotten Tomatoes reports a 65% rating based on only 17 reviews on the film with an average score of 5.8 out of 10.
That's just, you know, they're jabronis. That's some fake news.
That's when we need The Rock coming in. The Rock's just got one question for it. You know, it doesn't matter what you think.
Exactly. A bunch of candy ass reviewers.
IMDb has it a little higher at 7 out of 10, which, you know, it's still a little low in our books, but those famous Chris's favorite Chad Google users got GMK at a 92%, which is that's more like it.
That's about right. That's about right, man. They know what's up. They know what's up.
That's why the Google users so far are our favorite.
Yeah. Google can shove it. Sorry, Google, we love you. But those Google review users, like they know what's up when it comes to these Godzilla movies.
They sure do. Another number that you and I like to see is Godzilla is on screen for 16 minutes and 40 seconds of the film, or roughly about 16%. His first appearance is just after 38 minutes or 38% into the film, with a small tease of his spines swimming in the ocean at just over 3.5 minutes into the film.
Yeah, which that is a case where I agree that calling that a tease is apropos. You know, of I'll never let it go that the fight between Godzilla and Anguirus was called a tease. I'm like, you can go to hell with that nonsense. It will. I'll never let it go. But that's a tease, and yeah, they reveal Godzilla like very well. Again, they do the sort of water ripple when Godzilla rises in the bay. Again, a very. I feel like G98 kind of was the first movie to kind of do that, and that a lot of the Godzilla movies since kind of do that water ripple thing. So G98 did contribute indirectly or not to some of these following films. Whether it liked it or not. So I liked Godzilla Rising out of the Bay, which was a scene that was cut from the TV version. I distinctly remember. I cannot tell you all of the things that were cut out of the TV versions of these movies because they were edited for time. But I distinctly remember that the first time you see Godzilla in the TV version of GMK was when he pokes his head over the side of the mountain, being introduced very similarly to how he was introduced in the original 54 film. I remember in the TV version, that was the first time you saw him. And so I don't necessarily agree with the cut because I like him rising out of the water and being seen by the people on the boat and stuff like that. But I do remember that edit for TV.
100%. And I am shocked that scene wasn't like an honorable mention when we brought up our favorite scenes, because I had Godzilla looking down with those pure white eyes and those razor sharp teeth he has in this film is a phenomenal little 15 seconds of the film. I love that callback to the original.
Oh yes, and they cut to a wide shot of Godzilla sort of composited into the bay, and it's just a really good. They mix a lot of the effects up and the styles up in this movie, where it's like sometimes they'll composite the creatures into an environment, and then sometimes it'll be the creature with a miniature environment, and they mix up the techniques and suitmation with CGI selectively done, and they just do a really good job of it. And you see him coming through the city, and then he lets off his blast, and it's got like a mushroom cloud result. Like it's very just like it's a great Godzilla entering into a city sequence.
Yeah, 100%. It's that one. And the entrance from Godzilla 2000, those two are just hand in hand, and I love them both.
Agreed.
What did you think of Baragon's updated design in this film?
I think it's a good design. Fun fact, I actually haven't seen Frankenstein Conquers the World, the original film with the original Baragon. I've seen like some clips and bits and pieces, but I don't have a strong enough impression of like classic Baragon versus new Baragon. I kind of only know this Baragon, and I love it. I think it's a great creature, a great look, like a land creature, a burrowing creature. The sound design's really fun. The screech, and if anyone hasn't treated themselves to seeing the on-set footage of Rie Ota playing Baragon, and she roars inside the suit every time the creature roars, and she just does this like adorable like rah every time she's playing Baragon, and it's like the greatest thing ever. So everybody do your favor and go and look up those videos on YouTube because they're awesome.
That it is. It will absolutely give you a chuckle. And another fun fact we can spit out is she is the first female or woman suit actor in the Godzilla franchise.
Oh, that's surprising. Not surprising that it's like a feasible thing, but it's kind of surprising that it was like the law of averages would say that if you've got like 20 movies that at one point, there would have been one of the smaller ones that they would have put a lady into. So that's an interesting piece of trivia,
Yeah, and what I was gonna say is we got for the Baragon design is we got a little couple glimpses of him in like Destroy All Monsters, so that's like the Baragon I go to.
Yeah, he's like it's like because I don't even think that's one's weird because it's like Baragon and I think like one or two other monsters show up to the final battle. I think it's Manda and Varan and Baragon. They kind of get cut to show up at the arriving of the battle, but I do not think they do anything in the battle, which is, it is what it is. But like they're kind of just like there.
Yeah, and it's I just go back to that like cheaply made, the late '60s whatnot design, and then you come to this one almost 40 years later, and I think it's an awesome design. I like it's kind of kiddish how the ears kind of flap back and forth, or when it roars, the ears pop out, and
I kind of love that though. 'Cause it's got like this. I'll say it about all of the creatures' suits in this movie is they have this very like alive feel to them. The way they move and the way the animatronics operate and the puppetry and stuff, they just feel very. One of the early reviews I saw for this movie before I ever read saw the movie was like it's like they feel very much like kind of living, breathing creatures in this movie in a way that they often don't in these movies sometimes. And I agree with that. They definitely use a lot of whether it's camera tricks, the framing tricks, the sound design, the animation of the puppets and suits. Like they do a lot of stuff to try and make these things feel genuinely alive.
yeah, and I like that about this film. There's a lot to love about Baragon, but he's as a monster has gone so quickly. It would have been nice for almost like I would have liked in this film. The only thing that I would have liked from this film is to have Godzilla beat him up a little bit, but have him come back in the final battle and
That's yeah, I was always convinced that that's what it would end with would be a battle with all three of them versus Godzilla. Like at first I assumed he would maybe get beat up and then burrow away and come back for the finale. And then when I saw the movie, like when I saw him get killed, like blow up, I was like, oh well, he's gonna he's still gonna come back somehow because like they show his sort of spirit and then it dissipates. I'm like, well, these are magical monsters. Like he'll be revived or something for the final battle. And like as we went through the movie, there's even the scene like where they name all the monsters and they're announcing what the monsters are going to be referred to as. And like they mentioned Baragon, so I thought that was a cue that Baragon was definitely going to come back. And then the final battle is just Mothra, Ghidorah, and Godzilla. And it's like, okay, I guess Baragon was just like the South Park Kenny of this movie, where it's like he's there to be there and be the one that gets killed, and then he's not there for the rest of it.
yeah, like you brought up the spirit. You can call back to like Violante. Like maybe Baragon was gonna like almost come back in like a supercharged like form of itself, but nope, he just doesn't come back at all.
Yeah, he's there, and I mean, and absolutely, you can make a great case that's like, well, whatever monster Godzilla fights first, he's got to like decimate it and kill it to make a big impression of Godzilla. Godzilla's more overtly a villain in this movie than in any of the other movies. Like he's very much like demon Godzilla, like demon bad guy Godzilla. So you have to make your villain threatening and imposing, and so Baragon gets put into that. In pro wrestling, they would say like, oh, he's being used to put over Godzilla, or in anime, they might say that he like gets Yamcha'd or something, that it's like he's there to just get like immediately wrecked so that the bad guy means business.
Oh yeah, and Godzilla definitely means business in this film. But what did you think of his one of his other counterparts in this film, King Ghidorah's design? She's or Ghidorah usually towers over Godzilla in other films, but again, roles are reversed, and Godzilla is actually larger than his three-headed foe in this one.
Yeah, I always see there being a lot of sort of blowback on this movie for both Ghidorah being smaller than Godzilla and for Ghidorah being a hero instead of a villain. Like I've seen people where it seems like their like deal breaker of the movie for them is like, you don't make Ghidorah a hero. This is bullcrap, and it's like a ruining aspect of the movie for them. And like I cannot say that it ever registered that strongly with me, or that I ever cared that much. It's like yeah, Ghidorah is always the bad guy, but it's like this is a movie where Godzilla's the bad guy in some of the movies too, and this is just a movie where Godzilla's the bad guy and Ghidorah is the hero. Like I never really thought much of like, this is sacrilege. You can't do this. This is ridiculous. And as far as the size difference, it's like, well, yeah, Godzilla being the villain and being king of the monsters, like you would want him to tower over all of the good guys. Like that makes sense. And I've never found controversy in Ghidorah being being the hero for me personally. I think it's a great design. Like it's a really cool. I don't know. It's just like a well articulated design. I like that the wings are folded backwards for most of the appearance, and when he sort of reaches a higher power level, they unfurl, and you get this big visual moment. I think it's great.
Yeah, I like the King Ghidorah design. I like that in this film, his scales and the color of Ghidorah look super golden in this one. I like how that stands out.
Yeah, they really kind of lean into that fantasy aspect. The larger scales and like the texture that he has is a really it feels a little bit more of a throwback to maybe what they kind of were trying to go for in the Showa era. Like maybe conceptually what they were going for but weren't quite able to pull off, and I love it. It's a great Ghidorah look.
Yeah, and even the heads, look like an older mock-up from like the Showa era. It's got like the bigger teeth hanging out the sides and like the bigger horns coming out of the back of the head. And it just looks like how the 90s version of King Ghidorah was like a super updated, like brand new design. This just looks
And
like they took the
very
Showa.
sort of and the Ghidorah in the 90s was you can tell it had that sort of sci-fi creature on it because it was like a mutated combination of three creatures. Like you can tell they went with more of that, and this one is more of embracing like a more of a fantasy dragon kind of look. And a fun fact about the facial designs is that they did early design work for Baragon, Varan, and Anguirus when this movie was in early development. And one of the concept artists or special effects guys or suit designers or someone, when they changed it and Varan was dropped out of the movie, he applied a lot of the facial design work that he did for Varan to the heads of Ghidorah. So it's got like some Varan-esque aspects in the facial features, or what would have been the Varan of this movie.
Well, all in all, I like what they came up with. I do like that they finally made Ghidorah smaller than Godzilla. They made Godzilla more imposing, and I like the finished product of it.
Yeah, I think it's great, seeing Godzilla as like the evil dominating overlord over Ghidorah for a change is that's an interesting dynamic, You certainly can't say you've ever seen it before.
No, not at all. What did you think of the Queen of the Monsters in Mothra?
Uh, really liked her design. It's still kept a colorful and vivid design without being too kind of the 90s one. You can maybe argue that it's a little too kind of fluffy and pretty, like a little too like let's sell some plushies with this version. This didn't seem like it was going that hard. It's much more a bit more insectoid in texture, I suppose, but they still keep the vivid color palette. I really like it. I love seeing an interpretation of Martha that doesn't have the twin fairies as part of the lore. Another thing that Godzilla King of the Monsters would sort of take a cue from this movie. Both movies have nods to twin characters with Mothra, like very subtle twin character nods, but they don't do the sort of magical twin fairies thing, which is also fun to see. Uh, I like that they gave her the spore launching out of her tail, giving her some more dynamic attacks that aren't just laser beams out of her antenna. I love that the CGI model of Mothra is shown to be flapping at a faster rate. That's kind of a bit more realistic, a bit more believable, and I think it's a great design.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about the wings flapping because you heard me complain about flying monsters over the last 20 some odd episodes of that monster weighs a million bajillion tons and it's flapping its wings once every 10 seconds. What? It's not real.
Yeah, they've got helium in their belly. They've got anti-gravitational properties. I can fantasy off so many things about giant monster movies, but heaven forbid you put time travel in them, and then I absolutely blow a gasket. But it was still nice to see the increased flapping. Like they're like, hey, let's put in a little bit more here to make it. It also makes it look more alive, more animated. So it's fun and. yeah, I like it a lot. And this movie kind of started a tradition. Classic Showa Mothra died in her first fight with Godzilla, but for the Millennium era, we compared Baragon to Kenny from South Park earlier, but in the Millennium series, like this starts off a long line of traditions of like that's still held to this day in the MonsterVerse of Mothra showing up in a movie and being absolutely obliterated by the end of the movie.
Yeah, I like Mothra in this film, and she does. She just gets cooked sadly, but I love her design. I like that they made her like quicker in this film. They made her more agile, more aerodynamic kind of like she is moving. She's flapping them wings and she's hauling ass, and I like that her color is a little different. Her wings have some purple on them and her eyes have
Yeah.
like a purple glow to them, and I like that it's not the same exact design it was before. Just little tweaks, little, like I said, little different color to the wings. Her eyes are a little different color. They're purple. And I she does look, like you said, a little bit more like an insect, like something that you could actually see living. You can see like the little hairs on her. And I like Mothra's design very much in this film.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned the agility. I like seeing her sort of. She's got a few moments where she kind of swoops in fast. There's a moment where she swoops in and takes a blast to protect Ghidorah, and I love seeing that. I love the touches of the purple, and it made me think about the opening credits for this movie. Do this really cool thing where all the opening credits are against these like super close-ups of the texture of the monsters. And I really just wanted to shout out the opening credits because like that's a very cool concept for an opening credits, to kind of tease the flavor and the feeling of the monsters without having to like show a bunch of monster footage. And it's interesting that it's like these are all fantasy creatures, sort of. These are all sort of like guardian monsters, and Godzilla's kind of like a demon or possessed by angry spirits. And so they could have gone very fantastical and unrealistic with the designs, but it still feels sort of grounded in a lot of ways. Like there's not like a lot of like magical mumbo jumbo that seems to be happening. They still seem fairly like they're creatures.
Yeah, and you brought up the opening credits. I believe that's a callback to, is that Ghidorah the three-headed monster? Where
Yeah, they do a little bit of that. Yeah, they have some close-ups, and then they do intersperse like some really really small bits of footage into that too, to kind of like preview where the movie's going. But yeah, it's very much like in that style of like flavor up the monsters in the opening titles.
Yep, just another callback in the Godzilla franchise.
Hmm.
Where we're going to talk about them every episode.
Of course.
What did you think of the Big G himself here?
Oh, I think it's a great design. You can argue like again, instead of saying all the great things and then a minor complaint, like the only thing you can argue is like maybe it's maybe a little chunky, but honestly, I think it's a very powerful design. It's a very imposing design. The posture is interesting because at one point they apparently considered a sort of G98 type of posture, like a bent over horizontal sort of posture in the early design phase. And for various reasons they went against it. But I actually love that it's like a very straight up posture, and then even the angle at which the neck cranes forward, it just gives Godzilla an interesting profile when he's moving and you see him from the side. And I love that they go back to a more Heisei style design. The spines are sort of the maple leaf Heisei design. The jaw and head and mouth kind of have what I kind of always call like the rectangle kind of shape instead of like the rounded shape, and so like more like a bear's head, wolf's head, kind of a rectangle boxy shape to them. I love that head design. And the white eyes, like the demon white eyes, is just like it really makes this Godzilla feel evil and powerful, and I love it.
Yeah, I couldn't have said that better myself. And one thing I like that they do with this Godzilla, he does seem a little chubbier in this film, or the suit is a little bit more massive, I guess you could kind of say. I like that when he's walking, that every footstep there's a toom, 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 and
Yeah,
I love that they're trying to show the scale of this Godzilla. But everything you said, from the jaw to the teeth to the eyes, the spines, it's even the big toenails. When you see him putting his foot to Baragon's head, he's got these gigantic toenails on his feet, and I love the updated design in this film.
yeah, and like I always the shot I'm thinking of the shot when I think it's Godzilla going after Ghidorah, and he's like stomping on the ground and just like walking forward very aggressively. It's like doom 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 right by the camera, and it's like it just has this total like I'm gonna go kick some ass kind of a feel to it. Like you would not want to see that thing coming at you. And I think Godzilla's characterization in this movie is really cool. He's sort of overtly kind of evil, overtly trying to burn and kill people, and you have the young female character who survives the her sort of house or vacation home or restaurant or whatever being stomped on by Godzilla, and then she's in the hospital later, and Godzilla walks by and you think he's missed her, and then the tail hits and collapses the hospital and kills her. And there's some great moments in the fight where Godzilla's sort of wrapped up with King Ghidorah, and Mothra is coming up behind him to sneak attack him. And like, again, right when you think Mothra's about to get him, he smacks her with his tail. And, Godzilla just seems smart and powerful and like loving being evil in this movie. And I appreciate that, because Godzilla usually isn't overtly evil, and it's fun to see in this movie.
Yeah, it seems like every time he fights, or he knocks Ghidorah out of the fight, or Mothra or Baragon, he's enjoying himself almost.
Yeah,
he
you can
knows
just yeah.
he won't be stopped.
Yeah, he's in like full Darth Vader mode. You can just imagine him like grinning as he's causing death and destruction. It's fantastic.
All right. That is all we have for monster design in this one.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on. We could just keep heaping the praises, but yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Where, when it comes to GMK and the Millennium, how would you rate this on your ranking or tier list out of the 3 films we have so far?
So for the Millennium series, dishonorable bonus bottom spot would be G98. It's kind of not in the Millennium series, but for the purposes of this, it'll be number 4. Godzilla versus Megaguirus number 3. Very, very hard decision. I would slide GMK at number 2 and still keep the US version of Godzilla 2000 at number 1. Just because inherently for me, I am a slight more of a sci-fi as opposed to fantasy depiction, So like that kind of is a little bit of a tiebreaker, even though there's a lot of aspects of GMK that I would say, I like more than Godzilla 2000, in terms of like I like the kind of vintage Godzilla design of GMK, the kind of like neo vintage where it's like the old style, but kind of in a new way. But, Godzilla 2000 was still an awesome redesign of its own. So it's like, I think Godzilla 2000 edges, but they're definitely my 2 favorites so far.
Absolutely. And I second your list. I would throw G98 at the bottom, Megaguirus in the 3 spot, GMK in the 2 spot, and Godzilla 2000 would stay in the number 1 spot. And I think the only reason for that is the design. In my book, I like the Godzilla 2000 design better. I mean, if you switch designs and put Godzilla 2000 in GMK and GMK in Godzilla 2000, GMK might go up to 1, Godzilla 2000 might drop to 2. But for now, Godzilla 2000 will remain at the top.
Yeah, and like I said, as much as it's fun to kind of get a one-off where it's sort of fantasy and Godzilla's kind of like a demon or possessed by evil spirits and evil souls and whatnot, it's like that really is like, I don't know if I'd be into like a whole franchise or concept of Godzilla as that, like I kind of like of a more like these are creatures or sort of like ancient beasts, as opposed to like they're spirits and fantasy and energy and stuff like that. Like that's fine and stuff, but I just, like I said, like I'm more of a sci-fi than a fantasy type of guy when it comes to depictions of Godzilla. So it's like that is a little bit of a tiebreaker where it's like if you take that Godzilla design and put him in a more sci-fi Godzilla movie, and it's like, you know, it probably I maybe tend to like it a little bit more. So GMK, it's like, and like that's like the one drawback of GMK. It's like at its core, it's got this kind of concept that it's like, well, I wouldn't do a Godzilla movie where it's like fantasy magic spirit monsters, but all of the things that they do with it is really awesome. All of the monster designs, all the characters, the writing, the sequences, the special effects, all of that is so superb that it's like, well, you know, not my favorite core nugget of the concept, but it's executed extremely well.
Yeah, and both of these top two films are, you know, phenomenal films in the Godzilla franchise. And
they're upper echelon for sure for the pantheon. You know, when you're talking nearly 40 films, it's like I don't know if every movie I love is guaranteed a top 10 spot, because it's like you've got 40 movies to pick from, so it's not like super easy hierarchy, and there's a lot of movies to love, but these definitely, like, they rate high. There's no version where they don't rate pretty darn high.
Well, yeah, and here, once we're done with this Godzilla franchise and we get to our ranking episode where I make you give me your 38 to number 1, that should be an interesting and fun, thought out episode that I'll give you some time for.
Yeah, that's going to be brutal, because I'm sure like as I'm going down the list, I'll be changing and doubting my own answers and whatnot. I'll be like, I'm like, half of this is arbitrary. I'm just kind of throwing, you know, it's so tough to try and do, you know, but it'll be interesting to make the attempt though. Absolutely.
I mean, if it was 10 films, it might be a little easier how we're doing each era. But with the entire franchise, I've done it, and I've over the years I've changed them multiple times, and it's definitely tough.
It's a tall order for sure.
Well, when it comes to GMK, I think that is all we have today. You want to give us some closing thoughts on the film?
It's excellent. It is one of those that, you know, even if you don't have a baseline knowledge or experience with the first 54, like the one thing that's interesting about the Millennium movies, or at least a couple of them, is like, even though they kind of use 54 as a rough backdrop, you can kind of come in and just kind of, as long as you know that like Godzilla's a thing, you know, you kind of, it's not like this is a true sequel to 54 and that like there are specific and intimate details of 54 that you have to remember for this movie. It's like, no, it's like this is a one-off, and the backstory is simply a backstory that aligns with the original movie, which is like this Godzilla creature appeared 50 years ago and attacked Japan. Like that's kind of like they explain that backstory right at the beginning of the movie. You know, it's not like a sequel to 54 in the way that Return of Godzilla is. You know, it's almost a complete one-off.
Yeah, and I love it. This is one of the best times I have personally with a Godzilla film. It's not one that I go back to a lot. But when I do watch it, when I do pick it out of the bunch, it's like Godzilla vs. Destroyer, you know. It's not one of those ones I want to sit down and put in the background while I'm cleaning the house or just hanging out. It's one that if I'm going to put it on, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to crank the surround sound up, maybe grab some popcorn, order a pizza, whatever. Me and the lady are going to sit down, or even me by myself, and I'm going to pay 100% attention to it. I'm not, again, just going to throw it in the background.
It's good quality over quantity. And what I was getting on about is that this is a good one. Like, you know, you talk about gateway drug Godzilla movies and entry Godzilla movies. Like, this is a good one to hook someone in with, like, it's kind of vintage and classic at this point, but it's not one of the very kind of old and dusty ones. It's like you show this one to like a little kiddo these days, like it can get them into it. It can show them some cool stuff. You know, it can keep their attention. Like this is a solid one to bring a newbie in with.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. And it's just fun. I mean, I know we can say that about every Godzilla film, but you know, once Godzilla shows up in this and you see that he is a true force of nature, and the director intended him to be that way. From there on out, it's good monster fun, and you get him destroying some of the military and JSDF, and it's an hour and 40 minutes of a good time.
Yeah, it's fun, and the human stuff is like, we didn't really stop and talk very much about the human stuff, but I wanted to shout it out because it is done pretty well. Yuri's an interesting young protagonist, and she's got this fun dynamic with the sort of like the two guys that clearly are both kind of into her, but she's not really into either one of them. And if she is, it's certainly much more one of them than the other one. And it's like, it's this funny, like it's like a love triangle, but it's like it never becomes a love triangle. Like it's like this very sort of muted version of one. And it's like, that's this fun human dynamic. It's like, it's interesting. There's the scene where they first meet each other and they're like, who's he? Like stuff like that is just like super under celebrated about this movies. And it's like interesting and engaging. Human characters are not what the Godzilla movies revolve around, but it is nice when they're there to help the films flow a little more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, we've said in past episodes that they're trying to choose our favorite character. That there wasn't a lot to choose from in this film, but I mean, in this film, you could go with a couple. I almost went with the old, like, mysterious man who was locked up in the cell, or at some point, like at the end of the film, they said he died. What was it, like 100 years ago or something like that? It was just this creepy, like, mysterious guy. Or you could have went with Yuri's boss or her dad. There's some complex characters in this film.
Yeah, and that character, I mean, if I was trying to find something a bit more poignant for a favorite line of dialogue, he's got a great line of dialogue where he talks about how the Japanese people, like, deem it preferable to forget, like, what some of the Japanese soldiers did to other countries during World War II, because, in the end, Japan was the victim of the bomb. But, like, he talks about, like, that, they want to forget the past. And from what I understand, at that time in Japan, there was a lot of controversy of, like, how the exact events of World War II were being taught. And there was people in Japan concerned about, like, how much Japan was maybe whitewashing its own history a little bit in terms of, like, what they did to Chinese citizens and things when they invaded. And so, like, there was a lot of, like, it was a hot button topic of, like, rejecting or forgetting the past versus acknowledging it and learning from it. And that was kind of what they were going with a little bit, with, like, the dead souls of World War II participants were possessing Godzilla to attack Japan, like this sort of vengeful spirit thing. Like, there's some meat on the bones for this movie to talk about, so it's got a lot going on.
Yeah, for each one of these episodes, we try to keep them at max to about an hour and a half, so we don't bore people or talk people's ears off. But we could easily go for 2 hours on each film, probably, besides Godzilla's Revenge. That one, we didn't have much to say at all.
I mean, we could go for 2 hours. It just wouldn't be terribly positive.
No, people would be like, geez, these guys are just nagging. Next episode.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that is all I have, though, for GMK, coming in strong. Again, this is one of my favorite as well. I know it's one of your favorite out of the Millennium series and possibly the entire franchise. And this film was followed by Godzilla against Mechagodzilla on December 14th, 2002. And we will be looking at that on our next episode. Do you have any preview thoughts on that one for us?
It's the sort of bigger, better, more effective remake of Godzilla versus Megaguirus, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
All right, as am I. These are always fun. So, Chris, for this episode, I'll say thank you for joining me on GMK, because this one, there is a lot of good from this film. And after Megaguirus, it's good to get back to something that we are both so high on.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the highlights of the Millennium series, of the franchise, so you can't go wrong with this one. And it was a great discussion to have.
Absolutely. So I will have you join me next week once again for Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. So thanks again for joining me. Thanks anyone out there who's listening. And until next time.